All right, so would you want to start by just introducing yourself and
Yes.
kind of where you were born and a little bit about your background?
I'm Helen Godfrey Smith. I was born in Jefferson, Texas. And I won't tell you when because then you'll know too much. But I was born, I will say, toward the latter part of the 40s, and I grew up during the 50s and the civil rights movement of the 60s and early 70s. It was quite interesting, and I don't think that it's an accident that I do what I do for a living, because as a young African American girl in the 50s with a father who was a logger and self-employed logger, in this common vernacular would be a small business owner. He would often take this daughter with him when he would go to the bank to take care of transactions, and I have vivid memories of sitting in the bank and cringing because of the way my father was treated by the southern white bankers. But he was humble. He was an humble man, and it did not matter to him what he had to take in order to be able to take care of his family. And one of the things he was most proud of is that he raised 11 children, all to be very independent and very productive members of society, and he never took not a penny of welfare or any help from the state. And one of the things that Mr. Hosea Wesley Hodge was most proud of was his paying poll tax for he and his wife. And that was, even though he was not an affluent member of society by any means, he had his priorities right. And the example that he taught his family was that voting was important enough for him to pay to do it. Consequently, he raised a generation that's committed to the political process and committed to the power of the vote. We feel that if our daddy would pay to vote, surely we could vote free. So
when did you first kind of learn about the credit union idea?
believe it or not, after college, I was educated at Houston-Tillotson University, Austin, Texas, and with a double degree in math and chemistry. After college, I was recruited by the major oil companies all over the United States, in fact, all of the majors, and I was generally recruited, and I think it was mainly because, and keep in mind this was in 1970 and 71, when I would have been in the job market, and was Helen Hodge. I attended Houston-Tillotson College, now university, in Austin, Texas. I was a 4.0 student in chemistry, so there was nothing about my resume or my background, my name, nothing gave me away as being an African American. Consequently, though the powers that were recruiting apparently, I'm thinking, took me to be a young white lady, because they would fly me to Phoenix, to Los Angeles, and this Mobil Oil, Tenneco, and I don't want to name them because I don't want to, but I flew. They just, they recruited me and set me up for interviews. I flew and had a great time flying all over the country, but I always got the same response, and someone else always got the job. So eventually I was just frustrated and disappointed, and just decided I wasn't going to any more interviews, and I started looking for a job, and I found a job at the First National Bank of Kansas City, Missouri, which would now probably be J.P. Morgan Chase after the evolution of Bank One and all of the other buyouts. Well, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I learned banking from the inside out. I actually managed the backside of the bank. The transit department is what we called it, and we were a regional check processing center for all of the Midwest. So I had a lot of volume. I learned the Fed system, and I was responsible at the age of 23 to meet all of the Fed deadlines for the bank. We processed 1 million checks per night, and it was my responsibility to be sure that they were all processed, they were balanced, and delivered to the Federal Reserve Bank, which was several blocks from the main office. So it gave me some really good experience. I learned a lot. Consequently, now when I first learned about credit unions, my sister at the time that I was at the bank, my baby sister worked for the Postal Credit Union there in Kansas City. She followed me to Kansas City from Texas, and I had no idea because I worked at the bank. I wasn't interested in the credit union. Well, she soon moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where she went to work for a bank. And by that time, I was in Shreveport, Louisiana, disenchanted with banking in the South, and I began to look for a job and found one in a small credit union here in Shreveport. So she and I flip-flopped as far as our careers were concerned, but we were both in financial services. And getting in credit unions was interesting because credit unions it captured me from the first time I walked in. And I was very fortunate to have been hired by one of the greatest ladies of credit union land, Hazel Woodley. She actually ran, she was a local Catholic lady, and her husband was a local attorney, and they had 4 children, and I was her kind of third employee. But when she hired me, it did not take her long to recognize my brightness and my I had a natural tendency for math. So after a few months, she came in and sat down with me and handed me a credit union accounting book and said, I want you to read this. And of course, with me being a math genius, inherited from my dad, I learned credit union accounting. I taught myself credit union accounting. And within just months, I was actually doing all of the accounting and was very, just very versatile as it related to working in the credit union. I could almost do anything. So she decided to retire a couple years in, and she had made sure that she taught me everything from the front door to the back door about running a credit union. It was a very small credit union, less than I guess $1.5 million in assets, but it had all of the moving parts of a basic credit union. So I learned it, I worked it, and she recommended that the board would offer me the opportunity to run the credit union when she left, and they did, and that was even better experience for me. And it just sort of evolved until one day I was looking for a job, and this particular credit union where I am now in 1983 had an opening, and somehow by the grace of God, I know the grace of God, we were able to meet, and I became the manager, soon to be CEO of the SMECA, S-M-E-C-A, Shreveport Municipal Employees Credit Association Federal Credit Union. At that time, the credit union was approximately $1.9 million in assets, served about 2,000 employees, primarily municipal government workers, transit authority, little diversity, but not much. And it was just a great opportunity. I worked to turn the credit union around. In fact, at the time that I was hired, I did not know, but the credit union was in trouble. And I didn't really even know what that meant, but I came in with a good work ethic, And I came in, worked hard, and I knew how to run a credit union. I knew what a good credit union, what the components were, and I just put those things in place. And I wore all of these hats, and I like to tell people that I had a whole line of hats. I was the marketer, I was the collector, I was the teller some days, I was the loan officer, I was the risk manager, I did it all, the accountant. And as we grew, I would lay hats down and put them on other heads, and I'd have to remember what hats I still had owned. And so I'm fortunate today. We are a $100 million credit union, 8 full-service branches. We're serving close to 25,000 members in 2 states, and I still wear a couple of hats, so I'm looking for some new heads today.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of the credit union you came into and kind of how that growth has happened since you came on board?
Well, yes, I can. I can talk about, and I like to be very positive, but the reality was that at the time I came on board of the credit union was very entrenched in the ways of the South and the good old boys, where if you knew somebody, you got what you wanted. And this credit union was basically no different from that. And one of the first things that I did that I noticed was that, in fact, the supervisors would use the credit union for leverage with their workers. They control their workers basically by signing off on loans for them, because the supervisor had to sign a slip for you to bring to the credit union in order to get a loan. So the workers had to stay in line in order to have access to the credit union. Well, that was the first process that I dismantled, because I believed, growing up with Jose Wesley Hodge as my father, I did not believe that anybody, that every man should be able to stand on his own 2 feet, and he should be able to stand on his own background. And so I decided that process was not beneficial to the credit union, and the guys no longer needed to have that little slip of paper from the supervisor. And I took risks because, if the guy had lost his job or was not doing well on his job, then there was a possibility that could have posed a problem for the credit union. But it was worth it to me to see the pride in those guys' eyes. And they weren't just all African American guys. They were just, for me, it's just people. I think African Americans benefited a lot, but more than anything, my motivation was just that people would be treated with dignity. And that has been the prevailing rule and value throughout my leadership, is I've not intentionally built a credit union that would prosper African Americans. The goal was to just build an institution where people could be empowered, people could be enlightened, and people could gain access to capital, thus being able to live the American dream. And as such, as I said, I think I know African Americans have benefited, but there are a lot of middle class Caucasians and Hispanics and all others. We had, when it probably wasn't that popular, we served a significant number of Asians because they were engineers with the city of Shreveport and their families, and they were so receptive to doing business with somebody that just appreciated them, So through time, we have really had a very, very diverse field of membership, and still do.
So when you started the field, when it was $1.9 million, the field of membership was the municipal employees.
Absolutely.
What was the process by which that expanded, and what other communities that kind of came into the credit union over the years?
The credit union had never really tapped into the fullness of the municipal government employees, and so that was one of the things that, as we accepted the responsibility, we expanded services, and as we added checking accounts, debit cards, credit cards, then we began to attract a broader segment of the municipal workers, thus growing the credit union, where we systematically laid the foundation by adding services that as we could afford them. And as we did that, then we became again more attractive to more people at City Hall. And as the credit union grew, and we were so solid and well ran, I must say, we were invited. The first acquisition was the Grambling Federal Credit Union in 1991. And that was interesting. And I'm going to ask Martha Morris to talk just a little bit about it, because Martha can tell you some of the inner workings of what was going on behind the scenes before we were invited to come into the picture and bid on the credit union. I will say, though, I was very happy that Martha, another African American manager here in North Louisiana, she and I had a good relationship. We would attend training sessions together. We studied for our Certified Credit Union Executive designation. We often were roommates because most of the other classmates were white, and we were the two blacks in the credit union movement in North Louisiana. So we became friends, and we would travel together. So we had a really good communication, open communication among us, and the opportunity presented itself. She had gone to work at Grambling Credit Union, and they needed to have a merger partner, and she knew me and knew the credit union and knew that probably would be a good fit. We made the contact, she made the contact, and from that point we were able to work it where we did finally merge the two credit unions, and today it's functioning as we're the only financial services provider in the Grambling community. And of course, soon after that, well, not so soon, well, a few years after that, NCUA gave us an opportunity to bid on a credit union in Morehouse Parish. It was the Morehouse Parish Teachers Credit Union. And of course, it was not a predominantly black credit union. It was a very broad-based, diverse credit union. It served all of the teachers and all the students that lived in Morehouse Parish and their parents and families. And as such, we began to have a geographically diverse credit union, very unusual for most of the credit unions in North Louisiana to be so spread out. And it brought some challenges with it, but they were challenges that we met. I think we did a very good job meeting those challenges, and of course we did use the same principles of serving people, providing the services that were needed, and then being a place where people could have a second chance. And I think that's probably, if I could say, the one defining difference that this credit union has made. It has been the credit union's commitment to giving folk a second chance.
So one of the big challenges a lot of credit unions face when they sort of have those mergers happen is maintaining a sense of community among the membership.
Yes.
What was your experience with that? Did you have any things that you did to try to maintain that, or?
Yes, we were very focused with that. In fact, our credit union, we have, of course, credit unions are required to have annual meetings. And one of the things that we decided was early on is that whatever we did in Shreveport, because Grambling is an hour away by car, and Bastrop was 2 hours away by car, it wasn't practical to expect that those members would drive into an annual meeting. So early on, our board decided that we would budget to have an annual meeting in each of our market areas. So we had 3 annual meetings, and we would do basically the same things at each of the annual meetings, do the same reports, the same education, same product presentations. At the time, we would do things like, we wanted our members to know the kinds of things we could do for them. So we would have distributors to bring appliances in. We would have car dealers to bring cars into the convention center. And we would have boats and computers set up. And all kinds of things to get our members to understand we can do this financing for you, because of course the credit union had grown from very small when it could barely do anything. In fact, before I started, about once or twice a year, the credit union would cease to make loans because it did not have the liquidity. And of course, that's one of the things that I did, was began a liquidity management plan, so that never happened again. But that left an image in the minds of so many of those members, thinking the credit union cannot afford to finance a car, to do certain things. So those were things that we did to shatter that negative image. Well, but we also did that in the Ruston, Grambling community, and we did the same thing in the Bastrop, Morehouse community. And those members were also invited to not only attend, but we gave them a full meal, very nicely catered meal, and they were invited to bring a coworker or a family member as a guest, all on the credit union.
And so, given all of that, like what is the kind of member participation and governance look like? Is it something where you have pretty high attendance at these meetings?
Absolutely.
Do you have competitive elections? What do all those things look like?
We have competitive elections, but the good thing about what a lot of credit unions fear is the openness of elections. But we don't, because what we do is just really serve the members, give the members what they need. And they want our board members to stay in place because they are benefiting. They are really benefiting from the service of those board members. And so we do have competitive elections. The participation now would be between 300 and 400 an average. And of course, with us expanding into Mississippi, we now do 5 meetings, 2 in Mississippi, 3 in Louisiana. And we have an average of 400 to 500 people at each meeting annually. And not only do we do annual meetings like that, during the month of December, we do a retiree luncheon where we honor the retirees and the really loyal folk that have kept the credit union alive. We make sure they know that regardless of how much social media and Facebook we do to get the young people in, and the Gen Y and Gen X, and we really want them in, but we value the baby boomers and we value those senior citizens. And we do a trip once a year called the Club Prestige Trip, where the 50 plus members can just sign up, and we rent as many buses as necessary, and we take them on a trip within 3 hours of the credit union. From all of the marketplaces that we converge, we may have 5 buses from Shreveport, 3 from Grambling, some from Bastrop, and we try to find a place that's pretty centrally located around those 5 market areas, so that we could travel 3 or 4 hours and be there. We leave home at 5 or 6 in the morning, spend a day, leave coming home at 7 or 8 at night, and they get home at 12 or 1 in the morning, and they've had a fantastic day. They've had a great time at the expense of their credit union. We take them on 2 or 3 sightseeing tours, and we feed them, really give them 3 great meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And all of this is on their credit union. We've had as many as 15 buses sometimes on these trips. But it's just a fantastic thing. It's very unusual. But when you ask the question, how do you maintain the family feel of a geographically diverse credit union, that's how it's done. Because when all of those members come together, they have one thing in common. It doesn't matter what color they are, where they come from. They all love Shreveport Federal Credit Union, and they are all in one place. They are all having a great time. And we found that some of our members look forward to those trips because they don't see each other otherwise. They met each other on one of the trips 10 years ago. They still attend the trips, and they look forward to the trip each year so that they can get to connect with their friends that they've met down through the years. So it's very unique, very, very unique. I started talking about our retiree luncheon that we do in the month of December. And that's to honor retirees. And what we found now is that many of the senior citizens of the 70s, they worked for 30 years in municipal government, at the university, or even there might have been a teacher or an employee of a parish. In Louisiana, there are parishes, other places have counties. But they didn't have a lot of extra money to travel. And once they retired, they didn't keep in touch. There were no vehicles for them to keep in touch with coworkers. So we found that that was something that the credit union could do for the members of the credit union, is this retiree luncheon where we invite them out to come out and have a great lunch, and we play games and sing the 12 days of Christmas, and they have a ball, and then they get to visit and see people that they maybe have not seen since they retired. And it's a real good feeling for our members. And so those are just a few of the things that we know are very unique, but they've meant a lot to our ability to build a credit union family, to keep the credit union together as a community across 2 states and 8 branches.
So, you mentioned you wear many hats, and one of the hats is as someone who's involved in the African American Credit Union Coalition. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the organization and kind of how it came to be and sort of what you've done with it?
I will say Sheila Montgomery first. Sheila Montgomery is the visionary for the African American Credit Union Coalition. The African American Credit Union Coalition was born out of the Governmental Affairs Conference in Washington. Each year, that was the one place that a lot of African American credit union volunteers would travel to. It was part of the lobbying effort of the credit union movement, and we were there. But it was funny because most of the African Americans that traveled with majority white boards, and we joke now because we would almost be afraid to talk to each other because it was really funny. We would wave at each other and we wouldn't want anybody to see us really talking because people then thought that we were trying to. It was so much unrest. When African Americans would get together, the next thing you know, you're having a sit-in or a walk or somebody's getting bombed or something. So it was, so we would kind of pretend that we didn't know each other. We just like kind of sneak and wave at each other. So Sheila Montgomery had the courage to begin to invite us to all come to dinner. And it was just kind of informal. She had this vision of an organization. We had the vision of eating at Phillips down on the Potomac, down on the riverfront in D.C. So it started out probably with 5 or 6 of us getting together, and over maybe a period of 3 or 4 years, it might have grown to maybe 20 or 25 over time, and we began to seriously talk about why not organize, why not. There's so much that we could bring to the movement because our voice is not heard. There's so many people here at the Governmental Affairs Conference. It's one of the largest conferences in credit union land. But African American voices are not being heard. There has to be some value. And we discussed it, and we determined that we did not want to be perceived as a renegade group, a splinter group. We wanted to be perceived as a group that had very positive goals and wanted to enhance the best of what credit unions had to offer. And that was to bring our thoughts and our thoughts to impact the movement in an organized fashion. We would have a speakers bureau. We would have a way to really network outwardly, proudly, connect and network and gain the strength of that connection. Consequently, in 1997, we had our first formal organization meeting at Andrews Air Force Base Federal Credit Union. At the time, Michael Hale was the CEO there, and we elected a board of directors, we adopted bylaws, and we talked about what the name should be, and we decided on African American Credit Union Coalition. We chose a logo, which is the hand with the veins going up through the hand and it's reaching up, and the concept being that we wanted to be an organization that would help other African Americans be able to reach up as far as careers were concerned and in the credit union movement. And it took off, and we had our first conference in St. Louis. It wasn't a true conference, it was a meeting. It was hosted by Education Employees Credit Union, now Vantage Credit Union. Hubert Hoosman was the CEO there at the time, and the next year we met in New Orleans, and I was sort of the host there because I'm in Louisiana, not New Orleans, but and we had, it proved to be a really great meeting, and the next year we decided, well, let's try to move from a meeting to a seminar, and we did that. We had education classes and sessions going on, and we had, it was in Dallas that year. We probably had about 125 people to attend. We had Eddie Bernice Johnson, who was the U.S. Congressman out of Texas, as one of our key speakers, and we really thought we were making some real headway, and we were. The following year we had our conference in California, in Hollywood, and we had Maxine Waters that year. And that was the year that we started our Peak Career Lifetime Achievement Award, where we began to look out among credit unions. And one of the things that we saw was that with awards that were given out in the movement, rarely did you ever see an African American that was honored. But we knew so many people that had given their lives to the credit union movement. And one of the things that I say, and I know it to be the truth, is that African Americans invested much of their future wealth in credit unions. And not just African Americans, all people did. But it really impacted African Americans in a different way, in the sense that African Americans were coming from a position of lack, but yet they gave out of that lack and donated the one thing that they could have used to improve their wealth position, which was their time. They volunteered in credit unions. And so I like to tell the young people today that I'm so passionate about the history, and I'm so passionate about the movement because my ancestors invested their future value of money in credit unions. And unfortunately, it's not always valued by the powers that be. But those were some powerful investments. Somebody invested here. But there were African Americans all over this country that chose to, rather than to get a part-time job and save those dollars and let that money grow into a poverty-destroying opportunity for their family, they chose to invest their time and their mental expertise in credit unions. And I think it was an investment that will pay off for communities and for our country for generations to come.
And so one of the projects that you've undertaken in your involvement with the coalition has been sort of really digging into African American credit union history. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about what what things you've kind of learned in that process, and
Yes.
what are kind of some of the key things that that are really important for folks to understand?
I would love to talk about that. I'm a historian just by nature, so it wasn't a labor. It wasn't like work for me. It was a labor of love. And then as I became deeply involved in researching the history of African Americans, it became deeper and bigger than me. It became almost, and I won't say almost, it was actually spiritual, in the sense that of the giving and the passion that the African Americans leaders had to break that yoke of poverty and to be able to allow their communities access to capital and financial services. And I would literally cry sometimes as I would uncover. I was doing a lot of the research in libraries, but on the computer, internet was a great help for me, and to uncover some of the work that these men and women did in their homes. They literally gave up a portion of their homes so that the community could gain access to financial services. I would mention that Martha Morris, who's my senior VP here and who's sitting here in the room with us, she started a credit union in her home, and she nurtured it in her home. So I have just a tremendous respect for her and the work that she did in the credit union movement. And she doesn't know it, but this year she's going to be on one of the history panels for the African American History Project as we transfer that information in the International Credit Union Museum. Why is that so important? It was important because now we have any number of opportunities to access financial services. In the 60s, in the 50s, there were no opportunities for African Americans to have legitimate access to financial services that were responsive to what they needed. Most of them had no financial background, they had few resources, so they did not look attractive to mainstream banks. But credit unions would give them a chance. Credit unions would allow them to establish a payroll deduction. One of the things that I like about credit unions so much is that credit unions allowed African Americans, it was what I term as the great equalizer, in the sense that it did not matter what color I was or anybody was. If you started a $10 per week payroll deduction and you let it flow, that the value of those accounts were equal. And the African Americans who worked in service industries like Ford Motor Credit or General Motors or the teachers, the independent school districts, they all had an equal opportunity to make gigantic steps in their economic growth. And I think it was credit unions was very instrumental in creating a very stable middle America, which has been the source of the strength of our economy. And one of the reasons that our economy, I believe, kind of wibbles and wobbles now is because we've not nurtured that middle income. We tend to pay too much attention to the very lowest of the low, and then we tend to focus a lot on the ones that have. And those in the middle, which is the majority, they're the ones paying the cost to try to lift the low up and try to hold the high up. And it's kind of broken the back of the middle America, and it's weakened our economy. So probably not the way an economist would describe it, but it's the way a practitioner describes it.
So one thing in terms of credit union history that from all the research I've done, has been very little on the topic, has been the question of how segregation played out within the the credit union movement itself. From all the conversations and things you've had, can you speak a little bit to what you've learned?
I can. I would, again, I grew up in that era, and I was fortunate to be raised by parents who would not accept excuses. So the fact that I grew up black in a rural environment where no one thought that I would ever amount to anything, it never entered our environment. We were raised to not let that impact us, but it did impact a lot of people. There was a lot of lag. It was just not access. And credit unions, because of some of the things I talked about earlier, if you were a city employee, while there was some division, but you still had a vote at the credit union. If you had a share at the credit union, you had an equal share with your coworker, so you could vote. And ultimately, those votes added up to the credit unions having African Americans on their board of directors. Maybe not majorities, but at least a voice, and they began to gain ownership. And so, in spite of the segregation of the external world within the work environments and within the credit unions, there was almost always some integration. And I think that it was part of what has strengthened the movement, because that same integration occurs now. There's not as much diversity as I would like to see. I still go to conferences, and I'm still too much the minority. But I know back home, while there may not be as many CEOs or board members as I would like to see, I do know that the credit unions have always been open to serving in an equal fashion all of their members, whether they were, just didn't matter where they came from, what their backgrounds were. And I can't say that there might not have been some prejudice along the way, but I can say that credit unions was the better opportunity.
And so within the experience of kind of, you have the individual credit unions, but then sort of at the league level.
I would like to share a story with you that I was fortunate to come up under some of the real heroes of the credit union movement. I mentioned Edgar Fontaine. Well, he was a white Italian guy, right? But there were some African American gentlemen, one being Mr. Moody. Oh, Mr. Moody was a gentleman. Mr. Moody ran the teachers' credit union here in Shreveport. And Mr. Moody he'd been a principal of a school for over 30 years before he started running the credit union. And he ran the credit union probably for that long too, or longer. But he liked me a lot, and he understood, because I was young, and I had a lot of fire, and I really felt things ought to be fair, and I was pretty vocal, and he was like he was a great mentor, and he'd tell me, he'd calm me down. And he had a very calming voice, and he would, tell me things. He sounded like my dad, because my dad would say, "Baby, you got to live to fight another day," And it was just little simple things that I remember him talking about. And Mr. Moody was a lot like that. He had grown up when you just didn't talk back and you didn't have an opinion. And so he was very comfortable, while I was not that comfortable, but he helped me to be comfortable, and he helped me to find my place in the movement. Richard Turnley was another gentleman that was built his credit union, Southern Parents and Teachers, in Baton Rouge. Mr. Turner he loved to talk about the civil rights movement. He was he was a state representative for many years out of that area, and so he very, very intelligent man, and He was also, he was a Southernite, Southern University, graduated Southern University, and I believe he worked at the university for a period of time. At least I know he was in education. But his passion was running and building Southern Teachers and Parents Credit Union. And Mr. Turnley would tell us about going to the league meetings and not being invited inside of the meeting. And he'd have to, the African American leaders, board members and managers would have to stand outside of the meeting, and when friends or people sympathetic to that position would often come out and share with them what the debates were about and what they were learning, and they'd bring out packets of information and share it. And for me, that was just totally unpalatable. But they would help me to understand that it's just the way it was, and it was more important to get the information than it was to be accepted or or to be able to go and sit down with the crowd. It was more important that they be there, humble themselves enough to receive what was being given there, which was knowledge and information. And because they take that knowledge, and once they got it, there was no controlling, no one could control what they did with it. And it was a great lesson for me, and I've used it throughout my career. I remember many days. And Richard Turnley was one of the founders of the African American Credit Union Coalition also. But I remember that because through time being an African American leader in the majority white credit union movement, with regulators and everybody else not looking like me and not understanding me sometimes, it wasn't always easy, but with lessons and sacrifices made by the Richard Turnleys and the Mr. Moody's and the Mr. Steino Turner, which was a gentleman that ran Webster Parish Federal Credit Union. It's a neighboring parish here, about 30 miles from here. They were real gentlemen. They were some of the most intelligent men. And I could name, there are so many more in Louisiana, generally in teachers' credit unions, because that was, other than a municipal government, that's where the majority of professional African Americans would find themselves working as teachers. And so it was not unusual for those groups to have credit unions.
So you mentioning the regulators brought up another pattern that seems to be emerging from my interviews, which has been that, especially sort of in previous decades, there's been sort of tension between many like smaller African American credit unions and the regulators. So, like in the 1970 or so, when they instituted share insurance, there was an attempt by the NCUA to close close to a quarter of credit unions, and then there have been other moments like that. Like what do you see as kind of, in your experience and from what you've heard from others, the kind of relationship between the regulatory structure and the kind of African American wing of the credit union movement?
It has always been a challenge because of the lack of resources generally that was available for the African American credit unions, whether it was information, whether it was computers, or whatever it would have taken for that credit union to have functioned in an equal manner as their white counterparts. It was just not there. So for credit unions to have been judged in that lack, it always made for some difficulties. Many of those credit unions were able to rebound and stay alive, but many of them were not. And we lost so many credit unions, the Community Action Agency credit unions, the OEO credit unions, the credit unions that the NAACP started to empower credit unions. And I don't know if you know it, but through my research in history, I learned that the NAACP chose credit unions as the model in order to introduce financial empowerment to their communities where they hope to have impact. And there were often times NAACP credit unions formed out of the organization, the NAACP organization directly.
So would the common bond being membership in a chapter or something?
Yes, okay. Absolutely. One in particular that I'm very familiar with was in Austin, Texas. It was actually the NAACP Federal Credit Union, and then there was one that was very strong in Oregon that I uncovered. There is a one in Seattle, Washington, that was born out of the NAACP. So it was just it was a strong model. It was a good model because, and I believe it was because you did not have to raise capital in order to start a credit union, other than $35, $5 per person, and that was reasonable even for African Americans. So it was an equalizer. It gave access, but the key to it being that many of those credit unions just could not survive with the competition, with the regulatory environment becoming more and more strict and more compliance heavy. And now I believe the same thing is happening in the sense that small institutions will not be able to bear up under the compliance burden. Consequently, they give up and succumb to merger.
So so kind of given everything that you've looked at, are there certain characteristics or themes you see as being kind of unique to African American credit unionism, sort of when viewing it in the context of the larger credit union movement?
Some of the things that I think are very common, and they're not all, some are positive, some aren't, but one of the positives is the strong loyalty factor. And of course with credit union accounting, there's no accounting for goodwill on the balance sheet, but the goodwill of the African American credit unions could, if that was added to the capital, it probably would far outweigh the capital because it is so strong, and it's because of the loyalty that helps those credit union members not to cause the credit union loss. They actually have such a strong sense of ownership and community within the credit union movement. Some of the things that I have seen that were common is a lack of understanding of the leaders of the credit union, almost a mistrust of the leadership of the credit unions, and it's very disenchanting for credit union leaders to devote 30, 40 years of their life selflessly to build something, and then to have someone come in and judge it inadequate and just erase it with one strip of a pen. It's very, very hurtful and very painful, and it takes away a lot of the pride of a community.
And so when kind of thinking about, you guys have gone from 1 million to 100 million, the trends that are going in the larger credit union movement, what do you see as the kind of the future of your institution and kind of the African American credit union movement, part of the movement in general?
There's a need to reinvent what was, because the larger financial institutions, the huge banks, huge credit unions, are moving away from wanting even to serve the unserved, the underserved population. So there's a real need to go back, for Congress to go back to the drawing board and reinvent the credit union of the future, because there's still a huge number of unbanked and underbanked Americans, and that number grows and grows and grows because the most people cannot access, so many people cannot access or cannot afford to access the regular marketplace. So that's one of the things that I see evolving, is the need more than ever for institutions like ours. Now, when you say what is the vision for us for the future, it is to remain solid and strong. And it's to continue to allow our model to evolve and to remain relevant, while at the same time serving and keeping purpose constant, which is the empowerment of the unbanked, the underserved. And of course, we don't mind who we serve. We are not, we will serve the best of the best. But in our minds, the ones that have the less of what we term as the best. Because others have options, and we see so many times where we will help a family to clear up their credit, and we've got a particular credit score program that's we can actually give them a program, and if they follow it, they can improve their credit score by a prescribed number of points. And that has gone over so well with everybody. Well, once we get some people to the point that they've got a 650 credit score, 700, they may never look back at us. But those folk that, the unbanked, they are so eternally grateful that when they were unbankable, that we invested in them. And there's a sense of loyalty, there's a sense of appreciation. And I have had them, those members, to tell me, it does not matter who wants me. I will sit in the car dealership and tell them, send my paperwork to Shreveport Federal. I will not do business with anyone else, because when I could not be served by anybody else, they cared enough about me. They invested in me. And now it's my turn. I can invest in them.
So any final thoughts or final topics that we haven't covered yet? You think are sitting on the tip of your
Yes, the regulatory environment I think is important to the ongoing life of the credit union movement. I'm somewhat of a visionary. I do see, and I see not too far ahead over the horizon, that the environment that we are building today may come back to haunt us, in the sense that our tax-exempt status could be threatened, because so many credit unions are not as serious about doing the things that they were chartered to do, which encourage Congress to give us the tax-exempt status. So that's quite concerning to me, that we seem to be getting off focus. So I'm hoping that at some point all credit unions will begin to come back to center and not be so focused up on what your number is, what your credit score number is, and get back to the business of making loans, character loans, and making loans to people, and helping, to provide financial services for the person, because a person can have a bad thing to happen to them, but it does not impact who they are. And that's what we remember every day, is that we make loans to people and not paper.